Hey everyone, I just wanted to do a really quick video talking a little bit about what's in your package and also how to get started with these different supplies. So you'll find in your package you're going to have a piece of fabric pre-stretched on an embroidery hoop. That's to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like when it's actually stretched, and then a piece of fabric that's outside of the hoop. I thought that it would be helpful if you had two pieces of fabric, one to kind of practice your stitches on, get comfortable, and then one to be kind of your finished product. I've also included all of the threads that you're going to need, some needles, as well as the pattern that you will use to create your design. So I wanted to show you how to stretch your fabric on your hoop, because at some point you will have to change out your fabric. So I'm just gonna loosen up my hoop, take out my fabric. It comes out really easily. And then to actually stretch the fabric over my hoop, I'm going to just make sure that it is as loose as it possibly can be. And when I am going to stretch my fabric, I want to make sure that my hoop is really well centered and positioned on my piece of fabric. There's a lot of different ways that you can display your final product. You can put it in a frame, you can have it in the actual embroidery hoop that you made it in, and you could also, sew it onto a tote or something like that, make it a kind of patch. But all of these methods of displaying will be benefited by making sure that your design is in a good place on your fabric. And that means not only centered, but I want the top of the hoop, the top of the design, to actually line up with a straight edge of my fabric, as opposed to being, something like this, where the top of the mushroom is going to be somewhere here and then it's going to be kind of triangular, unless that's what you want. So you want to find the right space for your hoop. I'm going to do it not as well on camera, just for demonstration purposes, being a little bit more quick with it, but this is looking generally fine. And I'm going to just take this back piece of the hoop, put it in, fit it in, and then I'm going to make sure that the two pieces of the hoop are aligned and in the same position, making sure, that it's not jutting out, the back here is jutting out more than the front piece. So I'm just trying to make them generally aligned. And then I'm going to tighten it a little bit. Doesn't need to be totally tight. I want it actually to be a little loose, so that way I can move the fabric around and tighten it. So in the beginning, you can kind of see there's a bunch of creasing happening here. That's not going to be conductive to your actual embroidery. You want the actual weaving of the material to be really tight. That's going to allow your needle and thread to go through a lot easier, and it's also going to allow your stitches to be more uniform. If you're trying to stitch over this, some of your stitches are going to be a little warped and look a little crooked. So basically, you just want to make sure that you are taking care of all of this kind of warping in the material and make it really taut. So as you can see, you can kind of visually tell how tight the material is. This is kind of an interesting little piece. Sometimes you have to fidget with it a little bit, but essentially I'm holding around the edges here, rather than holding it like this. If I'm holding it like that, I'm warping the material and I'm not allowing it to be tightened all the way. And I'm also making sure every step along the way that my embroidery hoops are well lined up, so that way it can be as tight as possible. So one way I'm telling that my fabric is ready is visually. I'm still seeing the warping. My little fingers there, an example of why you don't want to hold your fabric. And another way to tell is by testing how it sounds. You want it to sound kind of like a drum. Drum tight is the word that people use. And also when you do that, you don't want to see any warping happening. I'm seeing the warping and I'm not hearing that it's like as strong of a drum sound as I want. So I am just going to keep going. And basically the process is just tightening, pulling your fabric, and tightening again. And I basically do that until I cannot tighten my screw anymore. And that's just allowing me to make sure that my fabric is as tight as possible. And now that it's looking pretty tight, do you hear the difference? I don't know if it's going to pick up over this video, but it definitely sounds just a lot tighter. So once I've done that, I can start, kind of getting ready to gear up to get my pattern going, my design on the actual fabric. So the piece that I'm going to use to transfer my design onto my piece of fabric is this kind of more bare bones illustration. One of them's an actual picture of the embroidery and one will be an illustration. We're going to want to use this one and basically trace this design onto your fabric. And I like to use a pencil that's well sharpened to get, these fine little details here. I like pencil because you can erase it, or if your eraser is not good, you can just kind of leave any mistake that you've made and go back with, I think rubbing alcohol will take out some of those pencil marks from your fabric, and you can kind of just stitch and then take out anything that, was a mistake after the fact with your rubbing alcohol. So I like that it's less permanent than pen, which can be a little hard to get out of, especially a white fabric. So I'm going to, use a window or my laptop on, full brightness, something that's going to give a little backdrop that will allow us to trace. And I am going to put the front of my hoop, you can tell which is the front by which one is easier to access. If you're looking at the back, you kind of have to reach in to get your actual fabric, whereas here, your fabric is readily available to you. So you want to put the front of your fabric against your design. Here you can kind of see it through. So trace your design, and then after you're done, you'll release your fabric, flip it around, and then well center it into the center of your hoop. And after you've got that, you've kind of got your guideline of where you're going to want to make your stitches. Then it's important to know how to read your pattern. So here they've kind of shown us what it's going to look like when it's done, and they've labeled things using a letter and a number. And in order to understand what they're trying to tell us, we have to look at this kind of key here. So unfortunately this was printed in black and white, and usually you'd be able to kind of tell the different colors they're referring to just right here. I've included a link to the digital version of the pattern. You just kind of have to sign up for the newsletter, and then you can download the pattern onto your computer. There you'll be able to see really well which colors coordinate to which number here. They also include a number that is basically the way of identifying different colors in embroidery. So some of them will match up, but some of them I had to make substitutions because the actual color or number was sold out or wasn't being sold at the stores that I was buying the supplies at. So I've left my own key in the resource guide, which is telling you, a way to identify each color and match it to the number that the pattern uses to refer to it. And then each letter will refer to a different type of stitch. So if I'm looking at this pattern and I want to start with, wrong pattern. If I'm looking at this pattern and I want to start with this greenery, I am looking at C4. I know that C is my stem stitch, and I know that 4 is my forest green color. So I know that I'm going to prepare my forest green and use the stitch that I've hopefully become familiar with and use that to create what they're showing on the actual pattern. Another thing that they're going to tell you on the pattern is how many strands you're going to want to use for this project. 1 strand is going to give you really, really fine detail. 6 strands is going to be really thick and give you a lot of volume and texture. Usually they'll give you a number in between. So we've got 4 strands here, and what that's referring to is, let me grab one of the skeins that I have. So these are called skeins. I'm using this red-orange one. So let me find the end of it. So once you find the end, basically you can kind of see that there are a bunch of different strands that are making up this thread. So there are 6 strands in total. I'm going to want to measure out how long I want my actual thread to be. So basically, I'm going to make this decision based off of how big the shape that I'm going for is, how much of this color I'm going to need, and also just kind of my own comfort. Each time that you're making a stitch, you're going to have to pull out the entirety of this kind of piece of thread, pull it through, and then go back in. So depending on, you know, how long your arms are, there will be a different comfortability with what feels right. But I like to do it, you know, kind of the length of my wingspan because I like to avoid having to thread my needle too many times. So if I know it's a pretty big piece that I'm trying to do with that particular color, I'm going to just try and avoid having to switch out my threads and thread my needle as much as possible.